Hi, everyone. There are some stories you read on the internet that are just amazing, and many of them are created at RPG tables, be them the ones between friends or the ones between fantasy adventurers. This story is one of our favorites, and we want to share it with you on a special episode of the Vanguard Chronicles. Here's to you, Lew. Welcome, everyone, to the Vanguard Chronicles podcast, where we have an ongoing conversation into the creative process behind the Vanguard, our monthly crowdsourced D&D campaign of interconnected one-shots. I'm one of the hosts of the and Dungeon Masters of the Vanguard, Nathan, also known as Spark Ascendant, and I'm joined, as always, by my host, Shawn, the good General Grom. How you doing today, General?
I'm doing great, Nathan. How are you?
Doing relatively well. I doing some yard work. I took a bit of piercing damage, stepped on a nail, so I'm glad to be sitting down at my chair right now.
Yeah, these are a lot easier sitting down, but oh my goodness. Oh, I hope you're okay.
Yeah. Let's say I was vulnerable. Let's put it that way. But before we get going too deep into this, so this session might run a little bit long, and it might be a little bit more freeform than some of the other sessions we've done before, but that's because we've got something really special we're going through today. So at this point, anyone who's been listening and has followed us for a while, as we've been giving kind of the tale of how we set up the Vanguard and this general campaign we've been doing, we at this point have, in the course of the podcast, as well as in the course of our story, gone through a few sessions. We've had a few games of D&D, enough that it's now officially a campaign. We have started to recruit a couple other DMs, sort of laid out a framework for the story and some of the major concepts that we want to go through. But today we're going to talk about a really special session. But before we go any further with that, we actually have one more introduction to do. Many people have heard us talk about our producer, Ryan, and why don't we have him introduce himself?
Hello, everybody. It is good to be here today with you all.
It's good to see you, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Ryan enters the chat.
I entered the chat finally. Usually I'm in the background. I'm taking notes, marking times, throwing banners up, but today I'm just going to join you for a casual conversation.
Yeah, well, that sounds good. And I think it should be a pretty chill, pretty casual conversation in general, because truly I'm a little jealous because it's going to be largely you two going, since the main focus of this episode is going to be on a session that was run at Shawn, your table. And it was, I believe, Ryan, your first game with the Vanguard in particular.
It was, yeah.
And truly, there's so much to discuss out of this that, again, as I stated earlier, this might run a little bit long. But before we get into it, real quick, I just want to say, if you want to help us out, if you want to support the Vanguard in any way possible, or support the Vanguard Chronicles, please don't forget to like, please don't forget to subscribe wherever you're listening to this, be it on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple Music, on any of those given places. It really helps us out with doing the whole algorithm chasing game. And actually, if you want to give back in another way, Shawn, would you like to talk about our charity real quick?
Yeah, if you one of the charities we decided to support, as we voted on, was called Extra Life, and it supports Children's Miracle Network, and specifically Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. We run a 50-50 raffle at our session. That's why we encourage our general audience to show up, get involved, help us with the charity a bit. You can join Meet the Guild stuff, and also our players. And up to this point, I believe, Ryan, we're over 500, I think.
Yeah, we've reached 500. We're closing in on 1,000, hopefully in the next couple sessions. So very proud of that.
Yeah, me too. It's awesome. There's a QR here on the screen. If you're so inclined, it is a great cause and it helps out kids. So thanks.
Awesome. Well, with that out of the way, guys, let's set the stage first. So this was, I believe, our fourth session of the Vanguard at this point, where this game takes place. It's predominantly you guys' stories, but I know one of the big things that happened at this point was we'd had the guild at this point. Shawn, you had printed like the pins for the different participants of the guild. I think at this point I was officially Spark Ascendant. We had started to lay out some of those ideas. I think the mono material was starting to be designed and come up with our main antagonistic force for those who haven't listened to the previous episodes.
Right.
The other cool part about this session was we had, for the first time, overflowing players at all of our tables. Am I right on that?
We ran into our first throughout this whole thing. One of our biggest concerns, at least my biggest concern, is always having too many players, not enough DMs, and we've kind of skirted around that up until this point. We hadn't really been pushed beyond our capabilities, but this was the first time we only had 3 DMs and we ran into 18 people. We wanted to keep the tables around 5. With 6 was something we all, I think a lot of DMs agree, it gets clogged. It can make your battles a little slower. It takes a little bit more effort as a DM to engage more players in that, all the players in that regard. So, yes, we had kind of, we got too many people. How are we going to do this? And how is this going to work? So that was like the first time that kind of happened to us. And yeah, we were still developing lore. We were still developing concepts from this whole thing that really hadn't been fleshed yet at this point.
And with that, building the community too. But we had a lot of long-term community members happen to join at this. I know at my table, this was Rin's first game when I was running Mind Over Gray Matter.
Mm-hmm.
But let's start talking about your table, because again, really, this is what we've been excited to talk about since we recorded the last episode. Actually, tell me about the players you had.
Well, one of them was right below me here on the screen. Ryan was his first partaking of the Vanguard experience. It was his first time there. Mike, who is now one of our steady DMs, he was also one of his first games. He was at my table. We had a couple.
I forgot this was Mike's first game too.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
We had a couple. He's friends with Brian. He was and then friends with us now, but he came in as friends with Brian. And so from there, the next then it was Gribble and Vega, who are veteran players. It was nice to see them. They had already earned their pins, so they were at that point. And then I had actually gotten reached out earlier. I saw a post in one of our local Dungeons and Dragons groups on Facebook from a person named Allen, whose cousin is on the spectrum, but loves to play D&D, and was wondering if we would be able to accommodate him in our game. And I remember reaching out because no one had answered him at that point, saying, "Hey, I run a monthly game at Sonora Restaurant. We'd love to have you. However we can make that happen. Let's start to communicate."
Yeah, and that's well, for listeners, put a pin in that, because that's going to become a really cool part of the story coming up. But before we dive too deep there, actually, we have a unique opportunity, because Ryan, not only are you our producer, our webmaster, one of our DMs, you kind of do a lot, and this is the only time I'll ever mention that. But you're our first player to have on the podcast, technically, since you did play in this game. And in fact, actually, I can rag on you more because you later were a player at my table and caused quite a few issues for my story writing. But at least for this story, you were at Shawn's table. So I have to ask, at this stage in the game, how did you find the Vanguard? How did you get to us at this point? Like, tell the listeners at home, how did you come on board? And also, can you just tell us a bit about some of your perspective at this point, man?
Sure. I came across it through Facebook. I mean, as I wasn't a social media manager before this endeavor. Now I think that's one of the many hats I wear in here. But it did cross my feed, and like anybody, there's that tipping point. If you don't have friends that play D&D, right, it's awkward to just sometimes go out and find a table. A lot of people are
Right.
not just disposed to say, "Hey guys, want to play this game that involves a ton of creativity, that I can put my heart out there, that I can, kind of role play in." It's not something that comes naturally to many people. And I'm an extrovert. Maybe some of you could tell that didn't know me, but at the end of the day, there was that sort of inflection point of, do I do it? Do I do it? Should I go? And I turned to my wife and she's like, "Oh my God, what are you waiting for? Just go." and full disclosure, I have two younger kids, so finding that time is difficult. But I did go. I walked into the dimly lit tavern, as you called it a few episodes ago. I
Yes,
saw
yes,
the
yes,
long-haired metal man in the corner.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So I went, no, but I went through the front entrance, and there's the back room. We were still in the back room at the time, and at that point, I looked and saw Shawn, and he was, I guess, at a table talking to some people, and I saw a few other players at your table. I think you were at your table at the time. I saw
Yeah, I was in the
Death
back
Bane and
corner.
Nova Blue, where they were playing at your table at that point.
Believe
Yeah,
so.
and won't say the first names, but Death Bane and Nova Blue, very welcoming people. Talked to me for a little while about how long I'd played, said that they would enjoy, I'd enjoy it here, and so I think Shawn, that when I introduced myself, Shawn is an amazing human being. For those who don't know him, he invited me. No, it's true. You can laugh at it all you want, but typically when there is new people, he thoroughly enjoys having new people at his table to kind of introduce them to the process, introduce them to the game, to the Vanguard in general. And so I think you invited me to your table there. And that was the start of something special, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, it was. I felt, when I met you again, you're right. I do enjoy having new players at my table and kind of introducing them to this concept and what we've started. And at this point, it was so loose, and it was still just getting its feet, and it was still just getting its kind of grounding in what we really knew it could be. But at this point, we were still just getting used to each other. Like, I just met, pretty much only know Nathan for a few times, and Brian
Mhm.
for a few times, and
I still thought you were crazy at this point.
right,
I
yes,
still couldn't believe
right.
it was
It
We
working.
was
all still
actually,
think each other are crazy at this point, Nathan.
I will say this, at the end
Fair enough.
of each session, there's a moment, and I know you guys still feel it. I still feel it. At the end of the session, when it's all over, and we look at each other like, "Wow, that was that was insanely fun. Everybody had a great time," and we walk away with
The
such a great sense of accomplishment.
Yeah, and I do want to say
the
this too, that inflection point of whether you show up or whether you don't show up, I don't think we've had a single person go, "Yeah, not for me." It's always been the other, like, "I am so glad that I took
Right.
that first step," right?
Hmm.
I think Ryan, the my favorite thing that you and I have now taken to saying, both from recording the podcast to when we did, for those who heard a couple sessions ago when I talked about how we've blown up to the point where, like, we've run multi tables. We ran a session where it was two tables all playing with two different DMs playing the same game of D&D. Ryan was there for me with that, and throughout that, or many of the other just things we have done over the past year of running this campaign, the phrase Ryan and I say is we look at each other and just say, "Dog, what are we doing? Like, what are we doing here?"
I
Right.
don't know. Having a lot of fun, that's the first thing, right? But yeah, it
Yeah,
is
for sure.
it is definitely an experience. So then I sat down just to cue you guys up again, across from another important person in this whole journey, and that is Mike, one of our illustrious DMs, who came in and sat down right across from me. And one thing you'll get probably from this episode is the threads, the human connections that are made with this. And this was an important time, an important episode, important adventure. I guess that's ironic to say adventure in our lives, personally in real life, right? But then also in the Vanguard as well.
I think it was that moment. I think one of the first moments I can remember, where I'm like, "Hey, this guild is this is pretty cool. This is like we're really starting to develop and grow into something that I know I'm going to be. I was already proud of, but I know I was watching my pride grow within it as each new person came along and got involved. You're right. No one, for the most part, I don't think anyone's really had a bad time. Like, they've come, they've had a good time. They want to come back. They want to be a part of it. They see our effort. They see how much we care about our games. I think that's the selling to me, one of the big selling points is they come back to, because we are so into it that it is
Yeah.
fun. I'm into
Right.
it. I'm not gonna, I'm not hiding that fact. I wave my nerd flag high. I'm, I
Yeah,
don't
and then
care.
to my left, was the illustrious Vega, and across was Gribble Fiddlefingers. You
And his,
mentioned
and
uh,
that was also when Franco, his duck, got named. He didn't
James
have a name.
Franco, the duck,
Yeah, duck.
might
Yeah,
be
that's.
violating copyright restrictions.
Well, I don't know if it's a hashtag James Franco and he wants to come on
Yeah,
and
that's
say,
true.
he can come on the show and tell us why we can't use it.
Yeah, thank
But that's he wanted a name for his familiar, and that's what he came up with. So
right. So
I'm like,
James Franco was born that session,
that
and
session,
then as you mentioned, we
with
had Craig Rock and Roller.
and Macaulay
Macaulay
Sparkle.
Sparkles. Yeah. It was a very
Uh,
memorable table for a lot of different reasons
uh,
we'll get into.
it's Vega, the divine sniper. Her
Mhm.
damage rolls I've never seen anyone roll that high consistently on damage. Every time she would roll damage, it was damn near max. It was ridiculous. I was
I
like, "What
think
are you
she did
doing?"
the same at my table the previous month. I think she
Right.
did the same at my table the previous month.
She had a record of like 4 or 5 sessions where it was like unbelievable how much damage she was. If you
Yeah.
put it all
It's a
together, you're like,
complete opposite. And I don't want to fail to mention this, that I play a character named Valas Deer. And Valis Deer was not of my choosing. I walked in, and of course, there's no FAQ. There's no information at this point really about hey, just show up and
we
roll.
needed an organizer. I don't
I don't
understand. We
know where you're
needed
Yeah,
I don't know where
I
you're
don't know
gonna
where we're
find
going
one,
to find
Shawn.
one. I don't know
But
how it's going to
at this
happen.
you were slacking when you joined.
I know. And at this point, he says, "Here's some character sheets," and he found a Drow rogue, right? So how Drizzt Do'Urden of me do I go? And I say, "All right, you know what? We'll just go ahead and lean heavy into this one." And of course, Drows have an issue with light, and I had small knives, and so I'll just I'll set the stage for that. But I don't mention this out of just nothing. It was fun to go in there and pull a lottery. So much so that I actually there's people that come in that have been thrown into this. One that was recently at my table that I told him, I said, "Listen, I know that you were thrown into this, and you just came up and you wanted to play." And he said, "You know what? I'm just going to roll with it. I'll take what I've been given, and I will just
Awesome.
commit to the bit." Right. So
Awesome.
it's fun to kind of have that fate rolled for you sometimes, and it turned into something bigger. But we'll get into the rogue bits later, I guess.
Yeah, that was again. I have to assess as a DM, and we all do it too. I assess my table real quick. I tend to. I almost want the more vocal RP players to be farther away from me than the people who are going to be less RP. Because if the less RP people are closer to me, I can pick on them more and get them more
Right.
into the role playing process of it's okay. I'm going to interact with you as a character. It's okay to interact back to me that way. The better role players are perfectly fine doing it from the back of the room. they'll add to it, and but you don't know that when they sit down, and you have to kind of figure out who's who,
Right.
and assess the table. And I remember when Ryan sat down, I could tell he was definitely a player who wanted to be involved and see his way. And Mike took over a little half orc, or was it half orc
No,
fighter?
tiefling.
No,
That was the birth of
Tiefling.
Lieutenant Mog.
was it Mog? Oh,
Moog.
Lieutenant Mog the
Yeah,
Tiefling,
Lieutenant
Moog.
Mo.
Mhm.
Yeah, right. Because he went with Mog, half man, half dog.
He also stirred
No.
up stuff at my. It's funny. Both the DMs who played first time at your table later, both of them stirred up crap at my tables too.
That's hilarious. I love that.
Thoroughly enjoyed that.
And with all the players in place now, what's interesting is Lew and Allen, which Allen was Craig Rock'n'Roller and Lew was Macaulay Sparkles. Is that Allen had reached out to his Facebook group, and I answered him. And now, knowing that Lew didn't see very well, that he had some trouble communicating, but he's got 2 college degrees. He's super smart. It's just his ability to communicate. So I was trying to make sure I incorporated him as much as I could in the adventure, knowing that. And I'm a firm believer that there should be no barriers to Dungeons and Dragons. This game's for everybody. Everybody should come and play, and people should be welcoming to that. And this was also one of the first times again, I had said it, and I'll reiterate it, where I realized that we had a great group of people. And I'll use Dave, Bullen Brightroar, the Dwarven Barbarian, is one of my favorite players, is one of my favorite characters within our story. He was so gracious with his time and just wanted to make sure that Lew was ready to play. And Lew, when he showed up, he was, I was told I'm not supposed to roll my dice until a DM is present. I was like, I don't know who made up that rule, but all right, I'll roll with it. But that was not a rule.
I remember
we didn't have
remember
rules
I
for
was
that.
setting up.
Right. We didn't have rules.
I remember I was setting up, and I was seeing him rolling the dice too, because we had like you and I both had pre-made, but my guy was just rolling, setting it up. I was like, all right, cool. Because I think I got started before you did as a result.
Yeah, you did. You got started. It was a little slow for us getting started, which is amazing that I had so much content that I was able to still squeeze into this adventure. But yeah, he was a little slow getting ready, but no one got upset or angry or impatient. Everybody was just really just cool, and that to me meant a lot. It meant a lot that we were starting to surround ourselves with guild members that are in, that follow the same cultural idea that we were trying to develop. We're all here to have fun. This is a good night out. Let's enjoy ourselves and not take it too seriously. And then when he got in the game, he was we can get into the actual story of the Veil of Shadows, but yeah, he was fun. I mean, I'm glad I was there to witness that and to see new players. And it's always been an issue. You have to think about this as we develop this. It could go south so quickly, and it didn't because of the people that are around us.
Yeah, and I got to be honest,
well,
I jump in here because this is one of the things that pulled me to it. We talked about this many times, and I think we connected on a personal level when we talked about culture coming from the top down. And you can't just expect the culture to be there. If you want people to participate, you have to participate. If you want people to do things, as we've talked about on this podcast before with guild dispatches, you've got to put one out yourself. You can't just expect people to give you the culture that you want. You have to, do that, lead by example. So that was something that, kind of drew me to it. But, the story was just as good. So I think, getting into that's probably a good idea.
Well, we can.
Yeah, hit it off, Shawn. I got to know.
All right. The Veil of Shadows. The Veil of Shadows, conceptually was the story is in this town of East Haven, not too far away from Waterdeep. There was an old sage named Eldrick, and he was tampering with magics he probably shouldn't have, looking for some other information. And he, in his experimentation and his research, he ended up releasing a shadow demon named Vexor. And Vexor corrupted the town. Every night it would come out of him and start murdering townsfolk and causing havoc. And Eldrick decided to, in an attempt to save the town, he became a hermit and went off on the outskirts of town. In the process, he meets Tovid, a white dog, canine that, for whatever reason, came into his life at this particular juncture and began to protect him from Vexor. Vexor could not evoke itself. And
right. This is the session where Tovid comes in, right?
Yes, Tovid, who's now Tovid was also my dog. So was it was a way for me, and I'll explain it quickly. It was a way for me. I had just had to put him down. He had passed from cancer, and so then I wanted to bring him back in canon. So this is how I did it. So now in canon and in our story, Tovid is a guild mascot because of his interaction with Eldrick. At this point, Eldrick was also blind. He became blind when Vexor took over. So that's kind of the backstory setup. And now he's on the outskirts of town. The Vanguard, with the Ledger, know that in the town of East Haven, there's a man named Dorian Windrider who deciphers magical ledgers and is kind of not necessarily a member as much as a ally. So the party was sent to take this ledger to Dorian Windrider in the town of East Haven. Unknown to the party, this corruption had been happening. As they get closer, they start to feel this corruption. But prior to that, where they got the ledger was from Whisper's Breath, the Fey Assassins Guild. They want it back. So that's when the opening scene is after they leave the Vanguard. They have, I believe, I'm trying to remember this. They were in a cart, like a wagon.
Mm-hmm.
Craig Rock and Roller was driving.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone else was in the back, I believe.
I think there might have been one person in the front, but I can't remember who. I was definitely in the back.
I think in the front was I want to say it was Vega.
Yeah,
I
it
want to say
sounds
Vega was in the
about
front.
right, but she can correct us.
So now as they start to go down the road, I'm watching the table and I'm seeing this happen. So the story goes, they suddenly see approaching. It looks like a amorphous mass of like a cloud, but it's moving in an odd way, almost like birds move. You know how they move in unison, and it's getting closer and closer and closer. And then they realize that they are miniaturized fey creatures riding hornets and bumblebees and flying at them in the thousands.
We got a genuine
that's
high bees
awesome.
moment. Now, remember, I told you this story is going to have a lot of connections, but here's the first point. I told you I picked a drow who already has trouble in the sunlight
Right.
with tiny daggers trying to kill a swarm of tiny people riding on fake creatures.
Right.
So needless to say, my first round of combat in the Vanguard was highly ineffective.
Yes. Watching them trying to figure out ways to capture, because here's how that played out. The assassins, what they would do, that they would try to attack, death by 1,000 paper cuts. But also the mechanic was that one or two of them would try to jump on you and sneak into your armor, and then they would poke you in an attempt with a small poison, in an attempt to charm you. And the charm was to figure out who was going to give me, who had the ledger. So now this is Ryan. You take over at this point. I want to know how the players interpreted this.
That's not a problem. But
wait, before.
Yeah, go ahead and let's remind people where that ledger came from, right?
That was my next thing too, because this is the ledger, right? This is the ledger that then I used for. That's right. I forgot this detail, which is funny because when last we discussed this. So for people who don't know, yeah, like that's right. This is where the ledger comes from. The ledger being basically a plot device that then I know a couple people use, but I used in particular for a lot of the backstory. So for these connected, integrated one shots, that ledger from this session was also a prime seed for all this storytelling to grow from in our whole connected one shot experience, as then you left that as an open story thread for me to take, and then for anyone to take, and then I just took it and ran with it and used it to shoot. I think literally my last session, this is a joke, but my last session was shoot, I'm writing a session off the ledger right now.
Well, that again,
ahead, Ryan, sorry.
The ledger was, again, an open plot device. And I just realized while you were saying that, I put that open plot device in great peril by giving it to these players, because who knows what they would have done with it.
No, and do things we did, I guess you could say, because, initially, I believe you said, there's this ledger you're transporting, figure out who's got it.
Right.
Okay.
And I walked away. I said, I'm going to step away from the table to let them figure it out, so I wouldn't know. I wanted to make sure I didn't have prior knowledge to who was holding onto the ledger. But they all agreed that if they had to tell me because of the charm, they would.
Right. So two people knew four people. Sorry. There was a pair that knew each other, another pair that knew each other, and then me and Mike awkwardly sitting across from each other. And we're just trying to figure out the best mechanism. And I believe, Vega says, I'll take it. And we all said, okay, that's great. You take that ledger. And she did not just take it outright. Okay. Shawn walked away, came back, and everybody at the table, save two people, knew where the ledger was. Now, I'll stop there because the juicy tidbits of that get more interesting later as we try to kill the fey creatures. And I believe we ended up taking a haversack or some sack and just trying to catch them as we possibly, as much as we possibly could. And Shawn, the clever DM that he is, knew that these guys were going around, so he hid a few of these fey creatures on us throughout the adventure. Right?
Right.
Yeah. So at this point, we have dealt with the angry bee swarm. The ledger was safely in quote, Vega, I air quoted for those of you who couldn't hear the air quotes. You air quoted that Vega had it, and we basically have moved on to the town. So I'll let you pick it up from there, Shawn.
Yeah, and also to make it more interesting, in the opening sequence of this adventure, Greg Rockarola, who's driving the wagon, he has a bunch of skill checks to be making while trying to keep this thing on track. And he's a dwarf, and he's like, I don't know how to operate horses, and this is not something I'm good at. So like he had a significantly difficult time just keeping it on track and making sure that it didn't tip over. And they finally got through all that process. Several times I would like, I remember going to Vega, I'm like, who has the, like, you failed the charm, you have to tell me. If you know who has the ledger, you have to tell me. And she goes, I don't have it.
And at this point, everyone at the table, except for the two people who knew, went, she's lying straight to his face. Wow, that's bold. I had no clue at this point there was another person involved in this plot.
So, right. Because she didn't have it.
She did not. She honestly did not have it.
Right. And I believe.
So I just want to. So I was gonna say I just want to touch base. So okay. So at this point, Shawn had walked away. Y'all had this discussion. It was Vega has the ledger. Cool. We have that. But then what you're saying at this point is now Shawn comes to collect, hits the one person who everyone at the table agreed has the ledger. And then when she's asked point blank, do you have the ledger? She says, truthfully, no, I don't have the ledger.
Correct.
Right. Because she didn't.
Okay, cool.
She gave it. I believe she snuck it. If I'm correct, she snuck it in Macaulay Sparkle's, like, his bag without him knowing it. If that's how that worked.
From what I understand, they collaborated. She, I think, caught on to Lew's situation and collaborated with him to sneakily give him the ledger. That's what
I thought it was great. It was fantastic.
You can correct me, but I'm pretty sure that's what happened.
Yeah. So everybody was as honest as they could be, and I thought it was well played, and it worked out really good as they arrive at the town now at this point, after they've gotten past the Fae, like, first opening scene. They get to the town, and it's nothing but mist everywhere. And this was interesting too, because I have run this adventure with a different group, and their reaction to the mist was so different than you guys. You guys just were very leery. I'm like, I'm not going in there. I'm not going in there. I'm not going in there. I'm like, well, all right, well, the entire adventure kind of hinges on you going in there. So I need to figure out a way to get you to go in there. And at that point,
smart players.
Right, at that point, Tovid showed up, right? If I'm correct, Tovid comes walking out of the mist, and the mist, for some reason, if you're within a circular area of him, you are protected from the mist. Right. And that's when he leads you to Eldrick the Blind, and the exposition dump of what's going on now happens at Eldrick the Blind. And this is when it gets interesting for me, because I realized I also knew for a fact that Gribble had Speak with Animals. I already knew it. I had seen his character sheet. I knew it was in there. So as a DM, I'm going to give it an opportunity to use it. Why not?
Nice.
So
good.
And I knew he was going to go right after it. Everybody else, because every time Eldrick spoke, Tovid's reaction was very uneasy. It didn't like, because he was explaining to the party that the only way we're going to stop Vexor is I'm going to have to recast this ritual, bring him out, you're going to have to kill him, and then I'm going to have to kill myself, because I cannot be a conduit for Vexor to re-enter. And every time he speaks about ending his own life, Tovid is very unnerved, and there's moments where he looks at Tovid and speaks to him. It's okay. I have to do this. It's the best for the party. Leading, and that's when Gribble went like, all right, I'm going to speak with animals. And that's when I got to pull out the voice. And that was so, it's cathartic for me to a certain degree. Because then I was able to go, I looked at him, I was like, he was like, well, what is he saying? He goes, what is he saying to Eldrick at this moment? And it's like, but Papa, you'll die. Who will I take care of? And at that moment, that seed got planted. That's all I needed to do. Now they have to, I believe this is, then you guys, I'm trying to remember exactly, because I do not remember it completely, but I remember at that point, now that you knew what you had to do, You had to get it set up within the center of town to execute this process. And I remember in the battle on the ensuing battle that started before that on the stagecoach, I was getting Macaulay. So he knew 3 spells really well. He knew what he wanted to do with them, and he was just cranking them up. And that was fun, and trying to keep him involved and keep everybody a part of the story. And in the end, I do remember the battle was pretty glorious. He cast the ritual. Vexor jumps out. It's a shadow demon that has a corrupting mist. Another factor, a mechanic I got to play with was corruption rules that I had found. In that being within that proximity caused you would have disadvantage on stealth because you couldn't stop coughing. Like stuff like that.
Yeah.
You got
Something tells me the rogue in the party had issues with that, didn't he?
Story time, Nathan, right? She'd like to put it. So I rolled horribly with this corruption. I had the worst stuff. Now, starting as a drow rogue, I believe my alignment on the sheet was chaotic good. And
I think
rolled,
so.
Cool.
Right, I rolled horribly twice, got a cough, couldn't hide, and then I became morally corrupt. So I slid from chaotic good to chaotic neutral, knowing that it was another possibility that I could actually slide to chaotic evil at that table during my first session.
Right.
In which PvP.
So were you neutral when you got to my table?
I am. Okay, so
were you neutral?
So in theory, I believe, Shawn, correct me if I'm wrong, a long rest or a week takes 1 point of corruption off.
Yeah, right.
But above the table, and then hopefully any of my players or the players of the Vanguard listening, I'm playing the long game. That Valas is still corrupted and still chaotic neutral. And if you look at all my guild dispatches, including the ones that I do for Valas as sort of like lore dumps and things like that, plot devices, I still write them in a chaotic neutral state, praying that someone one day will cast a great restoration on me.
Right, because you didn't fix it. You didn't fix the problem.
I didn't. And you know what? I'm a good character, and I play what's given to me.
I cannot wait until this episode drops, because for people who don't know, we record them well in advance. We have like months until this episode drops, and I cannot wait for the Discord to blow up, or for someone for like a session to start at, I guess, all 6 tables, and every single player at all tables says, "First off, where's Valas? I got a greater restoration I want to cast on him."
But I gave him a backstory and a lore, because I'm a junkie with that stuff, and I gave him an alias, a pseudonym, and that adds a richer story to it. I think, and having that chance that he could be morally corrupted and slip into that evil character, wouldn't that be amazing?
That would be a fun little twist.
Yep, it would.
It would be cool. So anybody who, and I haven't been doing a good job because I'm usually a producer. The stories are out there, vanguardguild.fandom.com. You can actually read the synopses. You can read the character backstories and things of that nature. So hit it up, vanguardguild.fandom.com.
Excellent.
Hey, you're pretty good at that for your first episode recording.
Excellent job with the plug there. That was pretty good.
Baba Booey of the DMs here.
There you go. But yeah, so in that fight, I do remember part of the thing was that you had to protect Eldrick and you had to protect Tovid, and the townsfolk that had already been corrupted were closing in on the party and making it more difficult to fight while they're fighting Vexor, and in divine sniper Vega fashion, she got the killing blow. I have said to her, "How do you want to do this more than any other player in the Vanguard?" I guarantee it. I have said that. How are you going to do this? How does this go down? As I try to find my own phrase, but yeah, to her, she has done the death blow way more than anyone else, and everyone got to participate. And I thought it was a well balanced and fun fight. But in the end, that was the final scene when after Vexor has been dealt with, Eldrick walks into the circle and is just evaporated. and is gone, and then the light fades and the dust fades and the mist dissipates, and is sitting at the edge of the circle is Tovid, just staring into the empty space. And at that moment, he turns and Tovid looks at Gribble and walks over and puts his, like, basically nudges up under his hand and, all right, let's go. And that's how they come back to the Vanguard. And that's how it ended. To me, it was, and that's what I also let everybody know. You guys didn't know at that point until I said something that was my dog, my dog, Divot,
Correct.
who I had for 12 years. And it was my moment to introduce him now into canon, and now he's a part of the Vanguard. And it makes me very happy. And so, yeah, that was how the Veil of Shadows ended. And these were stories, too, at the beginning. The loose ties were just objects. We didn't really start to bring lore into it until Ryan entered the chat and became a much bigger part of this, which is connected right after this session. I think this was Ryan's first diving in. If you want to think of it as any better time for you to come in, that couldn't have been it. That there couldn't have been a better time, because I had hit my stride as a DM. I knew this game. I knew this story. It meant a lot to me, so I poured a lot more emotion into it. They all mean something to me. Every story does, but this one had a particular meaning to me. And having Allen and Lew be a part of it, knowing that I was bringing this game to someone who was desperately looking for one, but was also having trouble. Who have difficulties and obstacles of his own to overcome, and I'm just glad we were a part of that and got to do that for him.
And actually, you as I recall, you got a follow-up message after the session had ended.
Yeah, I reached out to him, to Allen, because we had started to have some communications through Facebook. I just wanted to make sure he had a good time, and yeah, that his response was that it, as they got closer to home, Lew opened up more and couldn't wait to tell Alan's wife about it. Was very excited to play again. Was super happy to find another group. It's interesting because Allen, in his response to me, was like, "I'm not really sure he actually had played before." By the way the kind of the game went, he wasn't sure. But I think that's not to be true, right, Nathan?
Yeah, we'll put a pin in that.
Yeah.
We'll put a pin in that for the moment.
Okay.
But
yeah, he
there
seemed
was
to have
more follow-up afterwards.
Yes. Then as we went getting close to our next session, it was about a month away, I reached back out to Allen to say, hey, just in case you didn't get because we weren't as organized in getting out the message that we had another session coming up, and that's when he told me that our session was on the 21st of June, and June 30th he was unresponsive and he had passed away from a brain tumor, and that he was really he had a great time, and it was a shame that the guy had definitely been dealt a pretty bad hand in life, and that I was really sad to hear that, and but it also, to a certain degree, made me feel kind of good that we were able to bring some joy into his life with this project, and it's another reason why I thought this was something. And at that point, even in his response to me about that, I said, well, come on out. And he's like, well, I might stop by, but that's what he had told me that Lew had passed, and he wanted to donate his dice. And again, I told him I was really sorry, and that that was a very, very nice thing for him to do.
And it's funny that you say that because the first part of this episode, we told you it might go long. The first part of this episode, we told you about a story that Shawn wrote, was near and dear for a number of reasons to him. But I didn't know, April 15th, 2024, that he offered those dice to you. So the story just gets bigger. I don't want to say weirder, but bigger. There's a lot of great internet stories that you listen to out there. Right? There's one called, if you ever Google it, called the White Teeth Chronicles. It's a footy podcast. It's an amazing internet story that you just go, wow, I cannot believe that actually happened. And this is weirdly one of those. And you get a few of them in life, and they're interconnected for a reason. And after that, excuse me, I said to Shawn when I came back for the second time, because he was such an amazing DM, I said, hey, I asked him how Lew was doing, and he told me the news. And I said, oh my gosh. And it hit me. I said, well, do you think we should do something, or like an in memoriam? And Shawn was, smart about it and said, listen, he came for one. It's probably not the right thing right now. Let's just, let it lie for a bit. Maybe there's an opportunity down the road. Okay. And this was July, right, Shawn?
Yeah.
July.
July.
So
23.
yeah,
July 23.
And then at that point, we let it lie, and the Vanguard chugs on, and we had great sessions. December comes rolling around, and in a private group, we found a message from Craig Rock'n'Roller, Lew's cousin, I believe, right?
Yep.
And he said, I have these dice. I no longer need them, and I'd like to donate them to whoever first come, first serve. And I knew I recognized those dice. And they were the Titan dice that Lew had. And I messaged him. I said, is this like the Craig Rock'n'Roller, the guy I played with back, in the summer? And he said, yeah. And I said, listen, I have an idea. I don't know if you'll like it or not, but we try and pride ourselves in becoming a very inclusive group that all walks of, people and things. We try and make sure that, as you said, everybody, who doesn't matter who you are, walks in and has a great time playing Dungeons and Dragons. It's sort of like a mission, right? And I said, how about I pick those dice up? And I said, anybody who has a visual impairment, when they walk through the door, we will have them available just to help. And he said, yeah, sounds like a great idea. So come December 11th, I think it was, I drove to his house, picked up the dice, and I'll bring it up on screen. I know that you guys who are listening can't really see it, but it is, we have a thing called Lew's Dice now, and they are those big Titan dice that just sit on one of our tables. And I'll kind of read it quickly. They're just a picture of the dice on a sort of like a potion card, and it said these dice are for the visually impaired members of the Vanguard. These Titan Forged Wonders were a gift from a heroic mage, Macaulay Sparkles, once belonging to the guild. When wielded, they produce a sensation of endless possibility, and if a natural 20 is rolled, you gain a luck point. And they're in memory of him. So it was sort of our way of bringing it back around, giving something cool back, and doing something kind of in memory of Lew. And it's a fantastic story, but it leads into something crazier, right? It leads into something much bigger than this, and that is, uh, those dice mean something to us, right? They mean something to us as players, as people, and I think Shawn, you can talk more to kind of what that sort of inclusivity and those type of things that we do for people mean to the guild.
Yeah, the guild itself, I've always, once we started it, it has to be inclusive. There shouldn't be any barriers to this game. I think people, we get a social stigma that kind of rolls itself around this game at times, and I like knocking those, challenging those stigmas, and it's not because they're not as accurate as I think as some people put them into. And I remember I remember early on too, and in the early when we were a public Facebook group, I would have friends that are all part of my like my regular Facebook friends, would thinking they were being funny, like to them this was humor. I remember somebody in one of the posts I made just all his I won't say the person's name, but all his comment was nerd, and he moved on. And I went, and I think I responded to him and said, "It sounds like you have more of a problem than I have. Like I don't, fine, yeah. Why would you just open? It's like you opened a door and just screamed at a bunch of people you don't know. It's like, use your head, man." So to me,
Right.
I get it, and I just one of those. This should not be the place for that. There should be no place for that. To be honest with you, we should all be included in everything. But the Vanguard specifically was one of the missions was that we would be inclusive to everybody, and if there was a way to make it better, because that's the reason I had reached out to Alan prior to finding out what had happened, was how can we make it better? Can we color code dice? Is there another thing we can do that'll help him get more into the game. And if there's anything we can do for any of our players that they feel might be a barrier to them playing and having a good time, please speak up to us, and we're always receptive to making that happen.
It was one of the things that drew me to the group. I'm an altruistic person by nature. Picking a guild charity was a natural thing. Offering this for free or to people who need an outlet. We've talked about it a number of times, but there are people that walk through and we've seen their growth as human beings and a connection to something.
God,
and
yes.
Sometimes we don't have many minors that come through under 18, that come through. There's a few, but also when their parents, and me as a parent, when it strikes a chord in me deeply, when someone says, thank you for doing this, it means a lot to me and more importantly, my kid. And that's the human thread that kind of goes through it all. And weirdly enough, Nathan, isn't it? It's another sort of strange twist to the story. Typically after this, after the podcast, we'll sit there for, a half hour or 45 minutes of bullshit. And tell us what happened during that.
Yeah, so this is wild. So to rewind a little bit, that night I knew him as Lewis because I remember I was there and I was looking at this, like, seeing all the people who were there, and I recognized, you guys know him as Lew, I knew him as Lewis because I knew him in college. And I was staring at him and I was like, is that Lewis? So I even I got a big group photo of the group anyway, and I also knew he'd be in it. And I sent it to a couple of my friends from college as well too, because I was like, hey, is that Lewis? And sure enough, they were like, yeah, I think it is. So I went up and said hi. I said, hey dude, like, how are you doing? Like, I hadn't seen him in probably about 4 or 5 years. And like Lewis and I weren't like best friends, buddy. I won't pretend. He was in a lot of my classes because he was in we both were in the computer science department. And I knew he was a bit more socially awkward, but he was a really nice, really sweet guy. I knew he had kind of a rough home life that contributed to some other complications. I knew he had health issues. And so I saw him and I was like, hey man, like, how are you doing? He's like, he said, some things are kind of good, some things are kind of bad. Gave me a little bit of some of the medical stuff he was dealing with and some of the stuff that had been going on in his life. Some of it leading to more positive elements, some of it leading to more negative. I believe he had a surgery that was coming up not long after our session. Mm-hmm. So I said, well, hey, good to see you. Like, glad to see you here. In fact, actually, I had known that Shawn was talking about a player who was coming, who he wanted his table. And so when I said, oh yeah, that guy there, Shawn was like, oh yeah, he'll come to my table. I was like, oh, don't worry, I actually know him. That's why it's also funny that his cousin said, I don't know if he's played D&D before, because fun fact, I'm like 90% certain I was his first DM, because we did a research thing in college where we were looking into the idea of like artificial intelligence and maybe like setting up an AI that could DM. And so as a result, we got to do a couple practice games of D&D just because some of my classmates had never played it before. So Lewis has played in one of my games before. So unless he's played D&D prior, I might have actually been his first DM.
That's wild.
Yeah. But the other wild part was, so I didn't know his story up until I'm seeing him at the Vanguard. I didn't know, I knew about the game and how cool it was. I heard the story about the amazing deception that he pulled off with Vega. But then we were talking about it, and we were talking about the dice on one of our after, our after recording sessions, and just shooting the breeze for a while. And I said, yeah, so what happened to Lewis? Because I haven't seen him around. Because I hadn't heard how he had passed yet. And it's also kind of cool because just recently, Ryan and I hung out outside of this. We would have brought Shawn, but he was off working. And Ryan actually got to meet one of my buddies from college, and we mentioned how Lewis had played with us, and he also had not heard. And in fact, I'm even thinking of a particular professor of mine back in college who will be hearing this episode, who I remember texting at the time because he was really close with Lewis and saying, hey, like, here he is, he's doing good. I believe he's heard the news at this point, but it was so wild. It legitimately, we might post the actual raw footage, just because it is recorded, of all of us piecing it together, because you guys, I think I had mentioned to Shawn how I knew Lewis. You guys hadn't necessarily known that I DM'd for him before. Like,
Right.
all of these
Yeah.
stories is converged
Mhm.
in one, like, crazy when you think about it, point. Which, it's even crazier when you just, like, it sounds so cheesy and it sounds so corny, and I know that I think nerd culture in general is so accepting that you hear this kind of stuff about inclusivity and bringing people in and being opening and accepting. You hear it a lot, but I find this story to be such a, just a genuine, it, like you said, Ryan, it's one of those stories. It's one of those
Right.
moments, be it from the internet or just in life, that you don't get so
Right.
often. And to me, the idea that that this person who, again, like, went through life separated, and I was able to connect with him over some games back then. Again, like, I don't want to pretend that, he was my best friend. I don't want to, over
Sure.
import myself. But then to be able to see him come back and find joy again in this hobby, and a home in this community that we were building, and for it to be one of the more, certainly a really positive moment towards the end of his life. Like, you can't make that up.
No.
Like, for as much as we make up stories in what we are doing here with D&D,
Yeah.
you just can't make
No,
that up.
it
And I just,
personifies that example that you talked about of I mean, there's a lot of what's said there, and people say that a lot. It's a
mhm.
flashy, oh, you be inclusive, you do this, but it is another thing to sit down at a game that can sometimes already be awkward with strangers,
Yeah,
and then try to make sure that everybody at the table is having fun, genuinely pulling it off, and then having that human impact afterwards. And many of those threads converge that just reinforces the fact that, yeah, we're doing it right, or at least we think we are, right?
yeah,
Yeah, it makes me really understand there is a human element to this game, and there's a human side to this community that makes the game unique to itself, that makes it so unique from any other kind of collective endeavor. We are, and people have asked me many a times, how do you win at D&D? And
right.
there's, to me, these are the moments that I call winning, when we've connected, people's lives have become so connected in a way that we didn't expect, and in a very good and positive way, and to watch how that collective effort has its impact, and ripples in a pond. And that this was that moment when I was like, okay, the Vanguard is something that's will be important to people because it's important to me, and I've seen its impact, and I see how it's developing in growing with everyone else, and they've really, the embracing of it has been phenomenal, and I can't thank our players enough, and I couldn't be more happy with what we're doing.
Right. It's one of those things where people go, I cannot believe that millions of people watch this show, Critical Role. Why? Is it the Dungeons and Dragons? There's tons of Dungeons and Dragons shows. It's the people, duh. It's the
Yeah,
people.
Yeah,
It's the
right,
relationships and it's the people. And that at the end of the day is not just a D&D thing.
right,
It's an every sport, every event, every hobby thing, right?
yeah. Yeah, it's one of the things I do love about what we're doing. I really do agree.
Yeah.
well, with that note, and I guess on that note, that I believe is all we have time for on this episode of the Vanguard Chronicles. Um, First off, I think it's fair to say that we, want to thank again all of our listeners and all of our players, and certainly want to thank Lewis for a great session, and I think a lot that I think all of us will take from this. Um, but building on what we've discussed so far, we know that building a community like this, or even just gathering a simple group of 4 people for your home game, and growing it into something like this, is not always that straightforward. So that's why next time on the Vanguard Chronicles, we're going to share some of our ideas and advice on welcoming new players to your burgeoning D&D game or other tabletop RPG. Um, Please remember to like and subscribe so you're notified when it drops. And yeah, we'll see you on the next one. Thank you all for listening to the latest episode of the Vanguard Chronicles podcast. If you want to read any more about what's been going on in our current campaign, please check it out at vanguardguild.fandom.com. And of course, if you want to help us out, you can always subscribe here on YouTube, on Spotify, Apple Music, or anywhere else where you might listen to this podcast. But I'm assuming you've done that, right?